Just like the snap of a finger, week 3 of the fantasy season is here, so you know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go through every single matchup, talk about every single quarterback and tight end, and go over who you should be starting and who you should be sitting in week 3 of the fantasy season. All right, let's kick the video off with Thursday Night Football. We have the Dolphins traveling to face the Bills, and you guys know, especially like at the quarterback position, I don't particularly like Thursday night matchups, and Tua Tagovailoa did come back to life last week. 19.6 fantasy points, much better than the 7.2 fantasy points he had in week 1. He did throw for over 300 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns against the Patriots defense. So, I think he's still potentially in streaming category here, as the Bills defense is coming in 26 against the quarterback position in terms of fantasy points allowed thus far on the season. But still, I just think, generally speaking, I have Tua as a sit. I don't think there's a particularly high ceiling going into this matchup on the short week. So, super flex territory, fine. But for a majority of you guys, he's just going to be a sit. Then looking to the tight end position for the Dolphins, Darren Waller is yet to play a game this year. So there's been like almost zero involvement from the tight end position when it comes to this Dolphins roster. Tanner Conner had 4 targets in week 1. Outside of that, we have 0 targets to the tight end position, unless I'm missing something here. So no tight end to consider going into this matchup on Thursday Night Football. Then when we look to the Bills side of things, Josh Allen is an absolute must start each and every week, but worth talking about because he had 11.8 fantasy points last week. But all quarterbacks have down games. This wasn't particularly like a game script where he needed to do a whole lot. The run game for the Bills was enough against the Jets in week 2, and the Jets offense was anemic enough that just wasn't a lot that needed to be done. I think that he will be perfectly fine here in week 3. He's still the QB3 on the fantasy season, with only having 11 fantasy points last week. And thus far on the season, the Dolphins come in 31st against opposing quarterbacks in terms of fantasy points allowed, second worst in the league. So you're starting Josh Allen even on a short week. Don't overthink that one. Then Dalton Kincaid will just kind of live in the streaming category. Just 7.7 fantasy points this past week after having a touchdown and 14.8 in week 1. Not a bad matchup. The Dolphins are 23rd against the tight end position so far in the season. So I'm good with Kincaid if you don't have better options, but still, he's just going to live in that streaming category and probably be pretty touchdown dependent as the season begins to progress. And I hate to be a downer, but I'm just not feeling great about Tua going into week 3. His line on Underdog currently sitting at 235.5 passing yards. I think I'm going to take the lower this week for my QB Underdog pick on Tua because it's a short week and he gets this tough Bills defense and some bad juju in my head about Tua Thursday Night Football against the Bills. So I'm going to head straight to Underdog, take Tua's under on passing yards. Don't forget, guys, all new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH, you're going to get a free NFL pick'em to use towards week 3's action. Take that free pick'em, take the under on Tua's total passing yards. If both of those lines hit, you'll automatically double your cash entry. And on top of that, Underdog has a brand new exclusive offer to all users who sign up using promo code THECATCH. Once you play through $5 on Underdog, you're automatically going to receive $50 in bonus cash to use towards week 3 NFL action. And on top of that, Underdog is also going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So make sure you guys sign up on Underdog using that link down below with promo code THECATCH to take advantage of all of their week 3 exclusive NFL offers. Moving into Sunday's action with the early slate of games, we've got the much anticipated matchup of Jake Browning and Carson Wentz between the Bengals and the Vikings. So let's go ahead and start with the Bengals side of things. I have everybody at quarterback and tight end as a sit in this matchup. But I do want to say that I think Jake Browning in super flex area territory is probably worth a start. Especially if you drafted like Brock Purdy and Joe Burrow, and you're and that was it, there are situations where there are going to be some of these, quarterbacks out there on the waiver wire that we're going to have to utilize. And Jake Browning, 20 fantasy points this past week, 2 passing touchdowns. He did have 3 interceptions. He's got a bit of Jameis Winston feel to him, right? But we look back to the 2023 season when Burrow missed some time. As the starter, he had 19 or more fantasy points 4 times, 4 out of 7 starts during the fantasy season. Then in week 18 would also be included, but that not included for us playing fantasy, right? So we know that he can get it done. So like I do think he's worth a spot in super flex formats, but I think in most single quarterback formats, we're probably not in a situation where we need to start Jake Browning, but he will be on the streaming radar as the season progresses. The Vikings are 10th against the quarterback position on the season so far, so bear that in mind. It's not the best matchup there on the road, but Browning is startable. And don't forget, this is a revenge game for the team that notoriously cut him way back when. So bear that in mind. If you don't remember his, moment on the sideline the last time Jake Browning faced the Vikings and beat them, you can look it up. But Mike Gesicki, Noah Fant, there's involvement here. Noah Fant has been okay to touchdown week 1. But once again, we don't know the tendency necessarily for Jake Browning and the tight end. So we can pay attention to Gesicki and Noah Fant, but they are in no way going to be starts. Then we got Carson Wentz and TJ Hawkinson. So let's start with Carson Wentz. No, my answer is just no here. He gets the Bengals defense 13th against quarterbacks on the season. Like, I know we think about this Bengals defense, we're like, just start everybody, right? They're so bad, but they've been okay this year, quite frankly. So I'm not going to consider Carson Wentz just yet in super flex areas even. So we don't know how long he's going to be the starter. We don't know how serious necessarily the ankle injury is to J.J. McCarthy, right? I'm just going to stay away from this situation, point blank period, here in week 3. And I will leave it at that. Hawkinson, you guys got to be concerned about. You spent high ADP on him if you drafted Hawkinson, high draft capital, I should say. So my answer is just a sit for now. And I talked a lot about this in draft season. I wasn't particularly high on Hawkinson at his ADP. And we saw a lot of games last year where he saw pretty minimal involvement, but we did see some okay games from him last year too, and he was coming off injury, so I get it, guys. But I don't know. I don't feel good here when it comes to Hawkinson. The Bengals, not an awful matchup here, bottom 12 against tight ends, but especially with Carson Wentz starting, we just don't know the tendency of quarterback to tight end connection here, so I got to stay away from Hawkinson and consider him a must-sit player in week 3. Moving along, we got the Texans traveling to face the Jaguars. This is an interesting one. It really is. I got everybody as a sit, though. I'm not really a CJ Stroud guy when it comes to fantasy. I was pretty adamant about that last year, and so far on the season, he has 14.9 or less fantasy points through 2 matchups. He's faced the Rams and the Bucs, who are playing pretty good defensively, but the Jaguars are not playing bad defensively. They're kind of middle of the pack against quarterbacks, 16th against the position. So, I guess there's that. But yeah, this defense has been quietly pretty okay this year. I just don't see any real upside for CJ Stroud. Like, he's going to probably throw a touchdown here and there to Nico Collins, but Nico only had 3 catches off of 9 targets in week 2 on Monday Night Football. One of them just happened to be a touchdown. And, we don't know the status of Christian Kirk, but thus far, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, nobody's stepping up here. But there's just not a whole lot here. We saw Nick Chubb run for a touchdown, but the running game hasn't been going. Dalton Schultz is essentially meaningless here. So I just hate this spot. I got a bad offensive line. I'm not even in on Stroud in super flex territory. I would feel better about the upside of Jake Browning over CJ Stroud in super flex. So he's just a sit for me. And yeah, like I said, Schultz, really nothing to consider here from a fantasy perspective. He's a sit as well. And Trevor Lawrence, I was kind of close. I think he's more of probably in the super flex area. Single quarterback, he'll be a sit. And I have him as a sit here because this Texans front 7 makes me a little bit nervous. They're still coming in 17th against the quarterback position on the season so far. But yeah, I just don't feel great here. I think Trevor Lawrence is a bit matchup dependent. Like it was the Bengals last week. It's the Texans this week. They are at home. I don't know. I just don't feel like in single quarterback, he's really a quarterback that we need to consider this week. He's a streaming QB based on matchup, but it was encouraging to see him throw 3 touchdowns this past week, but he also had 2 interceptions and a fumble, so you can't really feel great there, right? And then Brenton Strange, come on, I will admit, when the Strange train gets rolling, I do tend to hop on it, right? But I don't know how often we're going to be able to trust him from a fantasy perspective. Just 4.7 fantasy points this past week, so I don't particularly feel great about him. And then once again here, the Texans are ranking top 5 against the tight end position on the season. The last 2 weeks, it's been really, really solid matchups against the Panthers and the Bengals, and he had 9.9 fantasy points and 4.7. So he's going to be a sit for me here in week 3. Next up, we got a battle of the AFC South with Danny Dimes and the Colts traveling to face the Titans. Let's start with Daniel Indiana Jones, first and foremost. My MVP of week 2. Listen, last week, I just went ahead and called him a sit. Like, I was like, I don't want to risk this against the Broncos defense. But if Daniel Jones is going to have 22 fantasy points, over 300 passing yards, a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown against the Broncos defense, then for now, he's just going to be a start, and he's more than like a super flex candidate. He's just a start. I mean, don't get me wrong. They get the Titans, who do have a good front seven this week. They get the Rams next week, who have a good front seven. The Raiders are kind of like his iffy team. And then they get the Cardinals, who are a pretty decent defense. Then the Chargers, then Tennessee again, Pittsburgh, Atlanta. Like, this is a tough stretch. Like, some of these defenses have struggled on moments, but they all have good front seven. So I do worry that some of this early season magic could wear out quickly. We've seen this before. Think about like Derek Carr last year was like the QB1 through the first 2 weeks, and that Saints offense was lights out, and then boom, nothing, right? So just be hesitant here. It depends on who you're starting Daniel Jones over, but he's a QB2 in fantasy right now. So when these trains get going, it's fun to hop on them, but, you know, maybe start to pump the brakes just a little bit here. But, man, you got to feel good if Daniel Jones is on your roster right now, and he's only sitting at 35% rostered. So I'll say against the Titans this week, go ahead and roll with it, but just bear in mind these things could start to wear out quickly. And once again, this front seven is good for the Titans, and they have allowed the second fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So don't get too crazy here in week 3. But you can feel pretty crazy good about Tyler Warren. I mean, maybe the ceiling's not drastically high here, but he had 11.9 fantasy points against Denver in week 2, 14.9 in week 1, 7 or more targets in each of the first 2 games on the season. So, yeah, I feel good about Tyler Warren. I don't see why you wouldn't. The Titans are 20th against the tight end position, so this is a good spot for him. Keep rolling with them. Hopefully we get some touchdown involvement, some red zone involvement here going for Tyler Warren. But for now, the PPR value is 100% there, and he's on a great pace for the season. I think right now, I mean, I know we're only 2 weeks in, but like he's on the same pace Brock Bowers was in his rookie season. There's something close to that, right? Okay, the Titans, I'm just going to sit everybody here. Don't sleep on this Colts defense. They've been sneaky good. The 6th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks and the 9th fewest to tight ends. And come on, I mean, we're not even considering Cam Ward in like super flex territory just yet. Chicken Conquo, like, sure, like there's some involvement, but it's just not enough to even consider him a streaming tight end. So don't think I need to break this down too extensively. They are at home. Saw a little, nice scramble touchdown throw to Io Manor out of Cam Ward this past week, but like, come on, it's not enough for a fantasy start whatsoever. So got the Titans players, these positions as sits. Colts are both starts. Moving along, we got the Raiders traveling to face the Commanders. Let's start with the Raiders side of things. Geno Smith looked absolutely putrid and awful in week 2 against the Chargers. 3 interceptions, only 180 passing yards, 20 yards on the ground after being pretty okay week 1 with 18 fantasy points. And this is really what Geno Smith gives you. Like, he's a matchup dependent potential streaming quarterback. And even then, you're worried based on matchup at times. Like, he'll probably have like 12 points this week, and then like 25 against the Bears the following week, then like 7 against the Colts the next week, then like 18. And it's just like Geno Smith, super flex only based on matchup, but I don't particularly love this matchup for him against the Commanders. They've still been decent, 14th against the quarterback position on the season so far. So yeah, after that 3 interception game on the road here, just no thank you. Now, Brock Bowers did play on Monday Night Football after being a scare all week long. Still at 8 targets, which was the same amount of targets he had in week 1, but just 8.8 fantasy points. Also had 5 catches, which is the same amount he had in week 1, but 38 receiving yards compared to 103 in week 1. So So, I mean, come on. If he's healthy, you got to start him. It's a good matchup. The Commanders, are ranking bottom 10 against opposing tight ends on the season thus far. So, feel good if you own Bowers. That I know Mayer has had some involvement here and has been on the radar because of the Bowers injury, but he only had 2 targets this past week, so not considering him. Now, when it comes to the Commanders, the time I'm recording this, all we know is that Jaden Daniels is day-to-day, as he had the MRI on his knee. We know there's a knee injury. We don't really know a whole lot about this situation, and I have a feeling the coaches are going to keep this as murky as possible as the week progresses, but if Jaden Daniels is not healthy and doesn't start, then Marcus Mariota would obviously be the starting quarterback for the Commanders, and he would be a sit for me. He's not on the screen. I have a feeling JD5 is going to play. I don't really know why. I just think they're at home. If they're on the road, I'd be a little bit more nervous, but at home against the Raiders, I will say maybe this is a spot where they try not to risk JD5's health, as they're on the road the next 2 weeks against the Falcons and the Chargers, who are both good defenses. So we'll see. My gut feeling is that JD5 is going to play this week, and this whole thing will blow over. And I mean, yeah, you got to start him if you own him. And it's a good spot for him against the Raiders ultimately. So I'll go ahead and just leave him in the start category and try not to worry about it. And then Zach Ertz, Zach Ertz is more than a streamer, and unfortunately, when it comes to some of these lower end tight ends, as soon as you start them, maybe he doesn't have as good of a day. The Raiders have been good against the tight end position, top 5 against the position in fantasy points allowed. But, I mean, Ertz sits at 53% roster. He's a tight end 2 so far in the season, has a touchdown in each of the first 2 games of the year, and 11.6 or more fantasy points. So, got to put him in the start category. But like I said, bear in mind, on paper, this is a tougher matchup, technically speaking, this week against the Raiders. Next up, we got a matchup of the divisional playoff round, or one of the divisional games. We got the Rams traveling to face the Eagles. And let's start with the Rams side of things. Matthew Stafford was fine last week, 18 fantasy points, over 290 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, a pick, a fumble. I mean, this is basically what you get out of Stafford. They have faced some tough defenses to start this season. Houston, Tennessee, now Philly, Indianapolis next week. And yeah, I mean, Stafford in Superflex area, could consider him, but I don't love this matchup against the Eagles defense. They're top 12 against opposing quarterbacks. So I'm just going to say for majority of guys, go ahead and set Stafford. Even in Superflex areas, I would be a little worried about him. Higbee saw involvement last week, 4 targets, 4 catches. The passing game script was pretty heavy for the Rams last week. I don't know. I'm not trusting Tyler Higbee anytime soon. He's just a sit for me. I don't even want to break it down even further than that. Now, when it comes to the Eagles, Hurts only had 11.5 fantasy points last week. He no pun intended, hurt a lot of you guys last week. Only 101 passing yards. He hasn't thrown for more than 152 passing yards on the season. He hasn't thrown a single passing touchdown. 3 rushing touchdowns, though. So, I mean, the last week was a weird week for the Eagles, and, Spags was ready. The Chiefs defensive coordinator completely ready for the Eagles, it felt like. So, I don't want to overreact too much. I don't want to sneeze at this Rams defense. They've allowed the fewest fantasy points so far on the season to the quarterback position. So, I do think that's important to realize. And then they've also allowed the fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. They are good against the run. So this matchup is not tailor-made for the Eagles offense, especially if you're looking at Hurts and Barkley as the primary, contributors to this offense. So I am actually worried about Hurts this week, but he's still in that tier of if you own him, I'm starting him no matter what. So we'll see how it goes this week, and then maybe we'll start to panic. They get the Bucs and the Broncos in the next 2 weeks before it lightens up a little bit against at least the Giants, the Vikings, and the Giants again before a week 9 bye week. So I'll leave him as a start, but maybe you sit him based on who you have. We'll see. All right, Dallas Goedert missed this last week. If he plays this week, he's streamable. We know that. Grant Calcaterra, 2 targets, 1 catch this last week. If Goddard is out, not going to consider him. But Goddard is always in the streaming category. And I think you can feel okay about him because I would imagine that the Eagles need to throw this week, but who knows what this Eagles team is going to do on a week-to-week basis. So we'll leave him in the streaming category, and we'll move along. Moving along, we have the Falcons traveling to face the Panthers. And I had Michael Penix as a potential streamer last week against the Vikings. And I hope not a lot of you guys started him as a stream last week on Sunday Night Football. Just 5.3 fantasy points. But kind of a weird game. The Falcons defense, the woes of J.J. McCarthy, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, like that's all that was really necessary. So I don't want to completely panic on Michael Penix. Like if you own him like a super flex format, or you're hoping he could be a QB2 for you or something like that. But still, you can't feel good after last week. And yeah, initially I was thinking like maybe we could keep him in the streaming area, but the Panthers have allowed the third fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks thus far on the season. So I'm just going to say sit him this week, and we'll kind of see how things go. And then we looked at Kyle Pitts. Like I think he's still in the streaming area. 5 targets, 4 catches this past week. 8 targets, 7 catches in week 1. But it's a good enough matchup here as the Panthers are 30th, giving up the third most fantasy points to the tight end position. So I think he's still in the streaming area. If you need to roll with him, I think his floor is safe this week. And then we look to the Panthers. Bryce Young was better in week 2. Don't get me wrong. 22 fantasy points, over 320 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. Did have a fumble and an interception. Now has a fumble and or an interception in each of the first 2 games on the season. But I don't want to put him in the streaming area because this Falcons front 7 looks really good, and they've given up the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks on the year so far. So I'm just going to leave Bryce Young as a sit, maybe in desperation super flex areas, like if Purdy, JD5, and Burrow are your quarterbacks and JD5 doesn't play and you lose on the waivers to get Jake Browning. Like maybe there's a spot here, but for most of you guys, let's just stay away. Ja'Tavion Sanders did see an increase in volume this past week. I do want to, make sure you guys are paying attention here. 9 targets, 7 catches, 54 receiving yards, 12.4 fantasy points. But the Falcons have given up the fewest fantasy points, to tight ends on the year. This Falcons defense is looking good right now. Kind of underestimated them going into week 2 and even initially going to the beginning of week 3. I actually think that they are basically a must-start defense if you guys play in defensive special teams leagues. But ultimately, focusing on the tight end quarterback positions here, pay attention to Sanders, but not enough of a consistent pattern for me to consider him a start yet, but definitely a player who we want to keep close eyes on. Next up, we have the Steelers traveling to face the Patriots. Let's start with old man Rodgers and the Steelers. So Rodgers, 4 touchdowns week 1, 25 fantasy points week 2, 12 fantasy points, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. So the Seahawks defense not looking so bad right now. It's a tougher matchup, but gets New England this week, and this defense has not looked that good, giving up the 21st most fantasy points to the quarterback position. So I have Rodgers as a sit. With all that being said, I think, super flex, sure, whatever. It just really depends on your overall options, but I just don't feel overly confident in Rodgers. I know week 1 was good, but this Jets defense looks like Swiss cheese right now, so I'm going to avoid Rodgers if I can, and we'll just leave it at that. Johnny Smith, Pat Freiermuth, I just don't know what the real ceiling is here. This past week, Johnny on the field for 56% of snaps, Freiermuth on the field for 50% of snaps, 4 targets to Freiermuth, 4 to Johnny Smith. I don't know if there's a great situation for fantasy unless one or the other finds the end zone. I still kind of lean Johnny Smith, and I think he will be streamable, and it's not a bad matchup. Patriots 18th against the tight end position on the week, so maybe there's something there, but ultimately I'm just going to go ahead and have Johnny Smith and Freiermuth as sits. Now, Drake May, nice week 2 performance, 26 fantasy points off of just 19 completions, 230 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 31 yards on the ground, and a passing touchdown. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair here. He should probably be closer to a start than a stream, as the Steelers have given up a lot of fantasy points to the quarterback position. So, if you were a Drake May guy in the off season and this is your only QB, yeah, just roll with them. That's completely fine. But I don't want you guys overreacting to a big performance against the Dolphins in week 2. Don't forget, he only had 16 fantasy points in week 1 against the Raiders in a game where he threw the football 46 times. So I'm just kind of looking for a larger sample size before I confidently put him in the start area. But I do think he's a top tier streaming option this week because they're at home, and this Steelers defense hasn't really been good this year. So I'm good with Drake May this week, but it depends format and what your options are. I'm leaving Hunter Henry in the streaming area because I still think he is a streamable tight end. And once again, the Steelers are 17th against tight ends. This defense is not like top tier right now. So I know he had 1.9 fantasy points this past week in a great matchup and a good game script, and he burnt you. But I still think he's streamable. But you know, I talk about all the time with streaming candidate tight ends, like they don't score a touchdown, you might be screwed, you know, and this past week you were screwed, right? I mean, and Henry is one of these guys who can live off of receptions. It just didn't happen this past week. But, you know, he gets Carolina next week, Buffalo the following week. There will be opportunities here. This is a good enough matchup that you can stream him, but, you know, just understand what you're getting into. If you have to roll with Henry, you don't have better options. Next up, we'll have the Packers traveling to face the Browns. Let's start with J-Lo and company. I think Jordan Love is a good streaming option this week after having 20 fantasy points in week 2 against the Commanders, 292 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 12 yards on the ground. But I would be a little bit wary here. The Browns defense, certainly nothing to sneeze at, and the Packers are on the road. And I think you can look at this two ways, right? I mean, the Browns defense is good. Their front seven is good, right? They're coming in 20th against opposing quarterbacks, but a big part of that is because Lamar Jackson just threw 4 touchdowns on them, you know? So, like, you got to kind of put that in the equation that they basically shut Joe Burrow down in week 1. Then Lamar just did his thing in week 2. So, I don't know how much this ranking, how much it means to me just through 2 weeks of the season thus far. I'll say it that way. And this Browns front seven is good at stopping the run. So I think that this could be a situation on the road here where the Packers need to throw more. We know they're down Jaden Reed. Maybe it matters. Maybe it doesn't. This could be a good spot for Jordan Love because they're forced to throw. It could also be a spot where maybe he struggles for a lack of a run game. I don't know. There's a couple ways to look at it this way. I think he is a good streaming candidate at the moment, but this could also be a tough spot for him. I like him a lot more week 4 against Dallas. I'll put it that way. But Tucker Kraft has basically moved into must-start category every single week, and we've had him as a start so far every single week. You know, he's a tight end 1 so far on the season. 2 touchdowns, 1 in each game so far in the year. Week 1, like maybe has a little bit shaky. He only had 2 grabs in that game, 2 receptions off of 4 targets, 9.9 fantasy points. And when you really break down Kraft's numbers last year, he is a touchdown-dependent tight end. But this past week, he didn't look so touchdown dependent. He had a good game even before he scored a touchdown. So, you know, with Jaden Reed out, kind of lack of receivers here, them still kind of meshing that wide receiver room with Matthew Golden, Romeo Doubs, Dontavion Wicks. Like, Kraft is in a good spot and a big beneficiary of the Jaden Reed injury. But this is a tough matchup. Keep that in mind. The Browns are top 8 against the tight end position in terms of fantasy points allowed. All right, then we look to the Browns. Joe Flacco just is not going to be it, guys. I know some of you guys in like super flex or double QB leagues like had some hopes here. It's just not there, guys. It's not. This Packers defense is for real. So I am staying steer and clear away from Flacco this week. Then let's talk about Harold Fannin and David Njoku. I will mention the Packers have been really bad against tight ends this year in terms of fantasy points allowed. They are ranking 28th against the position. So maybe I'm being unfair here because the matchup is there. I'd rather start Fannin than Njoku. I'll start by saying that. Njoku on the field for 82% of snaps this past week. Fannin on the field for 63% of snaps this past week. 5 targets to Fannin, 5 to Njoku. 5 receptions for Fannin, 4 for Njoku. I went into last week having both of these guys as sits. Then as the week progressed, due to the matchup and to the potential game script of the Browns needing to throw the football, I was like, okay, I think I like Fannin. And I should have gotten my gut feeling, right? I think the problem is the ceiling is just capped for each player with both these guys getting the utilization that they're getting. So I don't feel confident starting either player. If you have to roll with Harold Fannin this week, I think it's fine because the matchup is there. And then once again, the Browns are going to be forced to throw the football. But that was my logic last week, when like I said, when I started to kind of rise on Fannin. So I just don't love this situation for fantasy. I think the talent is there for Fannin, and I mean, the talent's still there for Njoku, but is it going to be a great thing for fantasy? I don't quite know. I don't think so. We'll see what happens here. They're at home. The matchup is there. Depends on your roster. But for most of you guys, I think the ceiling is capped for both these Browns tight ends as we move into week 3. All right, to wrap up the early window games, we have the Jets traveling to face the Bucks. All right, Justin Fields is in concussion protocol after having statistically the worst game ever, maybe from a quarterback, through the air at least. 3 completions off 11 passing attempts for 27 passing yards. Had 49 yards on the ground and 2 fumbles and a lost fumble. We don't know if he's going to play this week or not. I think he's still startable. I think he's streamable because it's still Justin Fields. You get a mixed bag here, but I mean, this is what you expect out of Fields, I guess. The upside's there. The Bucks are ranking bottom 10 against opposing quarterbacks and fantasy points allowed. So I think that there's that aspect of it. And they haven't been particularly good against the run, ranking bottom 10. So I think Fields can have opportunity in this game. They're probably going to need to put up points against the Bucks. Are they going to be able, forced to throw the football? I don't know. But Justin Fields is going to do whatever he does. If he starts super flex, stream, he might even get dropped in leagues this week. I still think that there's something here. And just don't forget, he gets Miami in week 4 and Dallas. Tough matchup week 6 against Denver, but then Carolina and Cincy. There will still be opportunities when healthy. If Tyrod Taylor's the guy, I'll stay away from him, even in super flex areas. I'm just not going to get into Tyrod Taylor. I think there's better options maybe out there for you guys. Mason Taylor has 4.5 fantasy points on the season so far. Not going to be anybody that we're considering anytime soon. Moving along to the Buccaneers. Baker Moneymaker Mayfield is a start every single week. 19.9 fantasy points this past week. 215 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. We are kind of missing, 22 fantasy points week 1's fine, We're kind of missing that high upside game out of Baker on the season so far. It's a good spot. The Jets are bottom 10 against opposing quarterbacks. This is the Bucks' first week at home this year. I mean, I'm all in on Baker anyways, but I think this could be a good spot where maybe we see a really, really good game out of Baker. But, I mean, the interesting thing is so far on the season, Mike Evans has faced A.J. Terrell, Derek Stingley, and now Sauce Gardner. And then he gets the Eagles next week, then the Seahawks. They haven't really been in a position where Mike Evans can have a big game. He's been fine. He hasn't killed you. He's had 10 PPR points in each of the first 2 games, but that's why we're seeing bigger games out of Emeka Egbuka, and they're kind of being reliant on the run game right now. I don't know if that's going to change this week, but I still think Baker is in a strong position nonetheless. And then Cade Otton, I mean, no, just no. 0 points week 1, 5.5 this past week. Just no. Nothing to consider here from a fantasy perspective. Moving into the afternoon slate of games, we're going to have the Broncos traveling to face the Chargers, in which should be a good divisional matchup. Bo Nix, told you guys, don't freak out. Don't panic. Don't drop him. He was fine week 2 against the Colts, threw 3 touchdowns, 206 passing yards, 20 yards on the ground. Did have a pick, but he got you 21 fantasy points. And, this Chargers defense is good, coming in top 10 against opposing quarterbacks. Nothing to sneeze at here. Good front 7, all that stuff. But, yeah, you own Bo Nix. You just got to roll with him. Maybe you have another option you like more, but I would say for a majority of guys, Bo Nix, solid start this week. Don't overthink it. Evan Engram is just a sit. I mean, we really should have Adam Trotman's name on the screen. He outsnapped Evan Engram. He has outsnapped Evan Engram in each of the first 2 games on the season. He even had a touchdown this past week, although he only had 3 targets, 3 catches. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at 4 targets to Trotman on the season, 6 to Engram, but like I said, more snaps to Trotman. Sean Payton has had this weird obsession with Adam Trotman for a long time. This goes back to his days with the Saints, if I'm not mistaken. Evan Engram looking like a bust maybe at the tight end position. Let's hope something gets going there. But for now, he's just a sit. And the Chargers haven't been great against tight ends, but you can't risk it here in week 3. You just can't. All right, Herbie fully loaded, 2 passing touchdowns, 240 passing yards, a fumble, but still 18 fantasy points in week 2. Without the fumble, you'd be looking at another 20-plus performance. Not as great as week 1, and this is a tough matchup against the Broncos, who allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. But yeah, you just got to start Herbert if you own him. He's in that category, and the floor is safe. The ceiling's there no matter what. You got to roll with Herbert if you own him. The Chargers are at home here, so it's a good spot. Solid start from both quarterbacks this week. And yeah, Will Dissly, Tyler Conklin. I mean, Conklin was on field for 100% of snaps and had 0 targets. Conklin's on the field for 88% of snaps, had 1 target. So we know they're going to target Ladd McConkey, Quinn Johnston, and Keenan Allen. And hopefully sometime soon, Omarion Hampton does something with this team. But I digress. Herbert, Knicks, strong starts. Let's skip the tight ends in this week 3 matchup. Next up, we have the Saints traveling to face the Seahawks and Spencer Rattler. Not too shabby, really. Kind of surprised me in week 2. Encouraging to see for the 6% of people who have Spencer Rattler rostered right now. But yeah, he impressed me. 21 fantasy points against the Niners, threw 3 touchdowns. Played a good game overall. They lost, but this was a good game for him, I think, at the end of the day, and they only lost by 5 points. Was in position to win this game, just didn't actually win the game. Nonetheless, I'm not going to start him. This Seahawks defense is not bad. 8th against the quarterback position in terms of fantasy points allowed on the season. So Rattler, just going to be a sit for me, but maybe in Superflex territory, we're at least paying attention, right? Juwan Johnson, another double-digit fantasy point day, 15.6 or more in each of the first 2 games. Had a touchdown this past week, has 9 or more targets in each of the 2 games this year. And while the Seahawks defense is good, they are the worst team in the NFL right now in terms of fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. So Juwan Johnson must start for me. Very, very strong start. He's still sitting at 51% rostered. And Spencer Rattler, not as bad as advertised, and he likes to throw to Juwan Johnson. Great matchup. I like Juwan Johnson a lot this week. All right, Sam Darnold was okay this past week on the road against Pittsburgh. Still had 2 picks, but 2 touchdowns, 295 passing yards, 17.8 fantasy points. I mean, maybe in like super flex desperation mode, but it's not a bad matchup against the Saints. But once again, I'm just not feeling good here. I don't think I need to break this down extensively. This past week was encouraging if you're of the 17% of people who have Sam Darnold rostered, but come on, a single quarterback, no way we're starting this guy. And yeah, there's just nothing here when it comes to the tight end position. Elijah Araro had 3 targets this past week. AJ Barner did find the end zone, and it's not a bad matchup against the Saints, but still, Barner 89% of snaps, Araro 40%. Nothing consistent here. Only 3 catches on the season for Barner. Only 3 catches for Araro. Stay away from these guys. Nothing that we need to consider from a fantasy perspective. Next up, we have what might be my fantasy game of the week. The Cowboys traveling to face the Bears in a matchup between 2 very, very bad defenses. Let's start with Dak Prescott, who gets the team giving up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season, who bounced back last week against the Giants, 23 fantasy points, 360 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, a pick. He's a must-start quarterback this week. This Bears defense looks absolutely lost. Jalen Johnson re-aggravated that groin injury. They don't have any real juice in this secondary. Prescott must start quarterback on the road this week. I think Jake Ferguson is a strong streaming candidate going up against the Bears this week. The Bears a bit better against tight ends, 19th against the position, but he had 16.8 fantasy points this past week, 6 or more targets in each of the first 2 games. Strong streaming candidate in a game that I'm expecting a lot of air yards and passing and all of that. Caleb Williams, still a start for me. I know he kind of came back to earth, I guess you could argue, although week 1 wasn't great. He still had 24 fantasy points in week 1, but 17.8 fantasy points this past week. So good enough. 2 passing touchdowns, a pick, 207 passing yards. But once again, the Cowboys are 30th against the quarterback position on the season in terms of fantasy points allowed, and they just allowed, vintage Russell Wilson to absolutely decimate them. So I think Caleb Williams is a strong start this week, but you got to be worried if you drafted Colston Loveland, I mean, he's 71% rostered, and he's getting aggressively outsnapped by Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet's not really doing anything, but he's been on the field for 90% of snaps in each of the first 2 games. Loveland sitting at 57% of snaps and 53% of snaps with just 3 targets on the season. I mean, Kmet only has 6 targets, but you can't start either of these guys in fantasy, and Loveland's getting close to an area of like, I mean, they have an early week 5 bye. He might not be on your rosters as we approach week 5 of the season. To wrap up the afternoon slate of games, we got the Cardinals traveling to face the Niners. Let's start with the Cardinals side of things. Kyler Murray, I mean, just 15 fantasy points this past week. He threw the pick. If he didn't throw the pick, it'd be another okay game. I'm leaving him in the start category, but he's like, I guess, bottom tier of the start category for me. Like, what is the real upside with Kyler Murray? Like, he does run the ball. He has 7 rushing attempts in each of the first 2 games, but like, I don't know if it's Kyler or if it's just this offensive scheme. Like, what is the upside with the Cardinals across the board? Like, we know James Conner's going to do some stuff. If he scores a touchdown, you're happy enough. We know Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to do some stuff. If he scores a touchdown, you're happy enough. If he doesn't, you're definitely not happy. We know Trey McBride is going to get the volume he gets, but like, that's it. Every single, like, we know exactly what's going to happen with the Cardinals every single week. And I don't think it's quite poor enough that Kyler needs to be a sit, but he is on the road here against a Niners defense that has allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks so far. So, like I said, bottom tier start. And I just hate this Cardinals offense. Trey McBride has to be a start regardless of matchup. Niners are top 12 against the position, so there's that. But yeah, you're starting Trey McBride no matter what. So let's just move on. Depends on who else you have, but Kyler's still a start, I guess. Mac Jones, I did talk about, if you guys watched the last-minute waiver wire video for week 2, I did talk about if you're desperate for a stream, I think Mac Jones against the Saints is okay, and I think he's okay here again in week 3 against the Cardinals. Now, this Cardinals defense is not bad, kind of middle of the pack, allowed the 15th most fantasy points to QBs on the season so far. Streamable, but know what you're getting into if you start a guy like Mac and Cheese. He did have 2 fumbles this past week, but through the air, very good. 26 of 39, 279 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. They're at home. First home game of the season for the Niners. He's streamable, especially if, you know, you lost a Joe Burrow, if JD5 doesn't play, Justin Fields doesn't play, you lost, you know, whoever. I think Mac Jones is in that category. Jake Tongs, probably not starting. We can probably just leave it at that. I know he scored a touchdown in week 2, but, you know, this past week he did have involvement, 5 targets, 4 catches, 7.1 fantasy points. But once again, no real ceiling here. So Mac Jones, streamable. And let's just move along from the Niners offense. All right, Sunday Night Football. We've got the Chiefs traveling to face the Giants. Okay, so the Chiefs are 0-2. I think this is going to be a good game for Patrick Mahomes overall against a very poor Giants defense that is ranking bottom 5 against the quarterback position on the season so far. Actually, bottom 6, I'm sorry. But regardless, you know, while there are offensive woes definitely for the Chiefs right now, Mahomes has 23 or more fantasy points as a top 5 fantasy quarterback, 23 or more in each of the first 2 games, and as a top 5 quarterback on the season so far. This is Sunday Night Football. All eyes on the 0-2 Chiefs. I think they're going to come through here, and I think Mahomes is going to have a solid game. So he is a solid start. He's ran the football 6 or more times, has 57 or more rushing yards and a rushing touchdown in each of the first 2 games. I don't want to see Mahomes get hurt by any means whatsoever. I think it'd be awful for the league. But at the same time, I would really like to see Mahomes keep running the football because he is very efficient when he does run the football. 9.4 or more yards per carry. And to his advantage, I mean, no defender really wants to hit him because it's going to be an automatic flag, right? But I digress. I told you guys just stick with Travis Kelce this past week. He had 4 catches for 61 receiving yards. He's in a good spot here against the Giants this week. bottom 10 against tight ends. You own Travis Kelce. You drafted him. Just roll with the punches. I think he's a solid start. Going to be a player who has to be utilized here as, no Xavier Worthy, or at least I don't think Worthy's expected to play. Or actually, now that I'm looking at the report, he is trending towards a possible week 3 return. But regardless, Hollywood Brown wasn't able to do a whole lot this past week. Worthy's going to be banged up even if he does play. There's really nobody else who's been able to step up in large fashion at the wide receiver position. So I still think Kelce a very solid start this week. Noah Gray did have 5 targets this past week, but we're not considering him from a fantasy perspective. Then let's talk about Russell Wilson, the elephant in the room. Okay, big week for Dangerous in week 2. 31 fantasy points, 3 passing touchdowns. His most passing yards ever in a game at 450. 1 pick, 1 fumble, 23 yards on the ground after just 11 fantasy points in week 1. Listen, don't jump the gun here, okay? Maybe we get surprised and he starts to be, like what Daniel Jones is doing or whatever. But that was against the Cowboys defense, and the Chiefs have not been particularly good against quarterbacks, but they have one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. And once again, I know we have injuries to quarterbacks, so some of you guys are in tough spots, maybe in a super flex format. But I just don't think this magic is going to roll over into week 3. I hope it does. I think it'd be good for, fantasy and for the league and everything, and fun to watch. And I hope we see more of those moon balls to Malik Neighbors and even Rondell Robinson. But I'm going to pump the brakes. I got Russell Wilson as a sit unless you are absolutely desperate in a 2 QB territory. Theo Johnson had some involvement in the high-scoring game this past week, 7.4 fantasy points. But the Chiefs are third against tight ends. What position are you in that you need to start Theo Johnson? He's just a sit for me as we approach week 3. Then to wrap things up, just one Monday Night Football game this week. We have maybe the best game of the whole week. The Lions are traveling to face the Ravens. Let's start with Jared Goff. Tale of 2 stories with Goff. Feels like this happens a lot. 11 fantasy points in week 1, 33.9 in week 2. 5 passing touchdowns, 334 passing yards as the Lions just decided to absolutely beat up on their former offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, now head coach of the Bears, at home against the Bears. I don't particularly know if that's going to be what it looks like here in week 3, but the Ravens are giving up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks on the season. And there's going to be a game where the Lions are going to need to throw the football. So, I know there's a whole Goff on the road, Goff at home, whatever. I mean, Goff has bad games. All quarterbacks do. You look back to last year, he had 12 or less fantasy points 5 times, and he was still the QB6 on the 2024 fantasy season. So I'm not going to panic here. Good start. The ceiling's probably lower this week. Sam Laporta, I mean, we saw some involvement out of Brock Wright this past week. He scored a touchdown and 3 catches. Laporta also is a guy who tends to fluctuate. He was the only Lions player who didn't benefit from last week's offensive performance. So I don't overthink this one. I think he's still a solid start as the Ravens have given up the 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends on the year. Listen, guys, I don't want to harp on this too much, but I talked about it a lot going into week 2. This Ravens defense is just not what some people think it is. I don't know if it's just because historically the Ravens have had a lot of good defenses. They have good players on this defense. In a game of Madden, I'm sure they're all ranked really high and this defense is ranked high or whatever. But the matter of the fact is last year they gave up a ton of fantasy points to every position except the running back position. And so far on the season, they're giving up bottom 10 numbers to every single position, including the running back position so far on the year. So this is a good spot for Sam Laporta. Maybe the ceiling's capped because it is a Lions offense. I don't know. But ultimately, I think if you own Laporta, you can just roll with him unless you have, you drafted a Tyler Warren or Tucker Kraft late or something like that. All right, Lamar Jackson. I was getting questions about Lamar Jackson last week. And I'm like, please, guys, it's too early for me to be getting these questions. You start Lamar Jackson every single week, no matter what. Just Derrick Henry had a bad game week 2. You're still going to start him in week 3. But just people were like, it's the Browns. They might run a lot. I don't even know. I was getting weird questions. You have to start Lamar Jackson. QB1 on the season so far. 4 passing touchdowns this past week. He only ran the ball twice, Lamar Jackson will find a way to get it done. And in my opinion, Lamar Jackson's mad about the MVP thing last year and is hunting for an MVP award this year. He is a must-start quarterback always, guys, regardless of matchup. And the Lions have not been particularly great against QBs this year so far, so start him. Mark Andrews, what is happening here? Okay, this one is kind of a weird one to me, and it's worth noting the Lions rank 8th against the tight end position on the year. I mean, the Ravens have now been in 2 game scripts where they've either needed to throw the football or they just flat out did throw the football, And Mark Andrews has 4 targets, 2 catches on the year. Isaiah Likely hasn't even played yet, so this is bad news for Mark Andrews owners, but I still wouldn't panic. I don't think you need to drop him. He had, through the first 4 games last year, he had 3 games with 3.4 or less fantasy points, and in 2 of those, 0 fantasy points, and he still found a way to finish as a tight end 6. So don't panic. Don't drop him. This is a tough matchup. I don't really see any reason that we need to start Mark Andrews this week. Unfortunately, they get the Chiefs, the Texans, the Rams before a Week 7 bye week. It might take till like week 8 until we see Andrews get going. And maybe he needs Likely on the field. I don't know. But for now, in the short term, we're going to sit him. But like I said, don't panic long term on Andrews just quite yet. And there you guys have it. There's every single matchup, every single quarterback, and every single tight end, and who you should be starting or sitting as we move in to week 3 of the fantasy season. As always, guys, I'm answering as many fantasy football questions as I can in the comment section down below. If you guys need anything whatsoever, please drop me a comment. I'll get back to as many of you guys as I possibly can throughout the course of the week. And while you guys are down there, it does me a huge favor if you guys hit that subscribe button on the way out. And all we do on this channel all year long is free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the way out. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.